Okay, Bismillah walhamdulillah. Alright, buddy. Assalamu alaikum. Alright, Hunain. So, after speaking about indefinite nouns, we moved on to definite nouns, which is one of the four properties of a noun. So, the four properties of a noun are its definiteness, whether it's definite or indefinite, its gender, number, and finally status. So, a noun becomes definite when you know its meaning and you know what it applies to. So, I'm not just talking about a book anymore, I'm talking about the book. The book, it's something specific. I put parameters around it and specified now that it's something specific that I'm talking about. It's no longer general. If I say go to the car to get the bag, you know which bag I'm talking about because it's something specific. So in order to make something definite, or make a noun definite specifically, you have to add the article the. And the article the in Arabic is represented with a lam with a sukoon. And since lam with a sukoon isn't really practical to say, like look at these examples here. You have baytu. To make that definite, you have to add a lam with a sukoon, so l-baytu, l-baytu. Doesn't make any sense. What they do is that they actually add something called a hamzatul wasl, which is a hamza that comes before it, making an l sound. So al-baytu. So the lam with the sukoon represents definiteness, but the alif is added in there so that you can actually pronounce it. The hamza is added in there so you can actually pronounce it. It's called a hamzatul wasl, or a relief hamza. So another example here would be l-miftah. Hard to say, right? L-bustan. Miftah means key, by the way. Bait means house, and bustan means garden. But l-miftah would become al-miftah. So to make a word definite, what you can do is just add alif lam. But the sign of its definiteness is that lam with a sukoon. Okay? So that's one of the ways of doing it. The second way of doing it, of making a word definite, is through association. So this is an interesting topic. So association is essentially indicating that there is something that is owned and there's an owner. And in English, they're usually connected through the word of. Right? There's some sense of ownership between the two. So house of Allah. Or in English, it can also be written as Allah's house. Right? Allah owns that house. There's an association between the two things. So house there is becoming something definite because we know exactly what is being owned. We know which house Allah owns, right? It's the house of Allah. We know that it belongs to Him. It's now something specific, not general. It's not a house of Allah. It's the house of Allah, right? And that comes about because of the association relationship between the two nouns. So the conditions to fulfill this is that you have to have two nouns side by side and absolutely nothing in between. There cannot be anything in between. And the first noun has no tanween or no al. So usually we look for al as a sign of definiteness. Most of the times it will be, but in this case of association, there is no al and there is no tanween. So words will look like this, right? Labanu, which means milk. Ma'u, which means water. Alimu, which means scholar. Mubinu, which means clear, right? They have no tanween and no alif lam, but it's still definite because of association. That's how the first noun will look. The second noun usually will take kasra, right? The one that follows afterwards, and that's a sign that it's the owner, right? The sign that it's the owned is that it doesn't have alif lam and it has no tanween, right? The ending could be dhamma, fatha, kasra. That all depends on the context. It's not always going to be dhamma. But the second one has a kasra usually. It can also sometimes have a fatha or dhamma, but you're just going to have to keep in mind the exceptions to that rule, because there's some words that just can't take fatha. There's some words that just can't take dhamma. That's just how they are. They're stubborn, right? So an example of it would be Baytullahi. So this one translated is the house of Allah, or Allah's house, right? It's an association. Why do we know it's an association? Because on the first one, which is the owned, the thing that's being owned, there's no alif lam and there's no tanween, right? And it's definite because it's being owned by something. In this case, it's the Lafdul Jalal, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it takes kasra. So in this case, Kitabu Zaydin, book of Zayd, book of Zayd. I know here, usually we understand that when something has tanween, it's indefinite, but there's actually some words that by nature are definite. So the names of men usually can take tanween, usually. It's not always the case. But usually they take tanween and they're still definite. It's just a sign of their definiteness, right? The other example here is Ainul Farasi which means the eye of the horse. And then finally we have Ainu farasin, which means the eye of a horse. Right? You see the association here? So we have the owned, and then we have the owner. We know this is owned and we know it's definite because it doesn't have alif lam, it doesn't have tanween, and it's followed by a word that has kasra. But that may not always be the case. So the best sign of knowing that something is the owned is that it doesn't have alif lam, nor does it have tanween. Okay? And this is just repeating the point that I made above, that certain nouns can be definite by nature, such as names, masculine names in particular, and require just names in general, and require no alif lam or association to do so. There's a few other things that follow this rule too, but Sheikh didn't mention them, so I'm not going to go into detail about them. Okay? Alright. Assalamu alaikum, bro.